The race for DeFi on Bitcoin is heating up. In today's video, I want to do a follow-up on Stacks and some of the unique benefits it's bringing to the Bitcoin ecosystem. Let's jump in. Welcome back to another video. My name is Ian Major. I'm an entrepreneur, Bitcoin pleb, and all-around raging capitalist. And in today's video, I want to do a follow-up on some of the DeFi on Bitcoin theme that you've seen me cover over the last few months. For those who haven't seen, I've done an overall intro video where I kind of go through a number of different approaches that are being attempted to sort of bring a broader suite of smart contract functionality and extensibility to Bitcoin. So I encourage you to check that out as just a foundation setting video. And then after that, I also did a video specifically on Stacks, which is sort of one of the approaches within this kind of DeFi on Bitcoin topic. And so in today's video, what I want to do is a few things. One is just a very brief recap of some of the fundamentals of Stacks. Again, I'm not going to go into as much depth as I did in the other video. And so if you're brand new to Stacks, I would encourage you to check that video out first and then come back here. But then I also want to go into just now that I've sort of spent some more time in the community and ecosystem over the last few months, I want to both talk about some of the benefits that I think Stacks is bringing to Bitcoin, right? That's what this is all about. How can we extend the usefulness of Bitcoin? How can we build more and create more value around Bitcoin? And then I want to also kind of spotlight a few very interesting projects that are happening within the Stacks community that are just really, really incredible. Part of the impetus for this video is a kind of recent and ongoing debate amongst Bitcoiners on Twitter, namely between some of the folks over at Liquid and Blockstream, and some of the folks over at Stacks. So we'll kind of pick that apart and reference that as we go through. But nonetheless, I think this should be a very, very interesting one. You won't want to miss a thing. For those returning to the channel, welcome back, my friends and brethren. It is nothing short than an absolute pleasure to have you. And for those new to the channel, I welcome you as well. I know there are many of you. In fact, about 80% of you watching right this second are not currently subscribed. So if you like this content, I invite you to consider subscribing and join us in our merry gang in cyberspace. I cover all manner of Bitcoin-related content, whether it's wallet tutorials, news, analysis, mining, running your own node, and of course, DeFi on Bitcoin, Lightning Network, all sorts of stuff. You want it, I cover it. And so with all that out of the way, let's jump in first with just a very high-level recap of what Stacks is all about. So let's start at ground zero. I mean, when we say DeFi, what do we even mean? Because that is a term that has become such a sort of buzzword, it's kind of lost its meaning. But ultimately, it's about creating applications or services that can perform and render those services in a trustless fashion. I think that is the key, right? We can say decentralized, sure, but ultimately you can have varying levels of decentralization and also have varying trust models. And ultimately, for me at least, it comes down to the trust model. Are you to what extent, because it's a spectrum, it's rarely kind of binary and fully trustless, right? The goal here is really to minimize trust that you have to place in other entities when you want to conduct something like borrow against your Bitcoin as collateral, or perhaps lend out your Bitcoin in exchange for interest, right? And so this is really important, right? If you just have Bitcoin as this kind of trust minimized, most robust, sound money that's ever existed in humankind, like that's fantastic, but it's not enough to win the day for individual sovereignty, true individual sovereignty. As I speak, there was this thing going around this morning on Twitter of this, I think, nominated, so not yet confirmed, but nominated officer of the comptroller in the U.S. who would kind of oversee the highest level banking regulations in the U.S. And she's written a paper that proposes moving all commercial bank deposits into accounts with the Federal Reserve. So, I mean, something that months ago would have been considered a conspiracy theory is now published in a paper by someone who may be confirmed into this incredibly influential leadership position in politics. And so, this is urgent. Bringing DeFi to Bitcoin is urgent. We need trustless applications and ways of conducting finance that extend beyond simply kind of transferring money back and forth to each other. So that's kind of the motivation here. And there are a number of stripes and flavors for how that might be accomplished. And I don't think we have seen the final answer yet by any means. And so again, check out that sort of intro video that I first pointed at for a rundown on some of the different models, be they side chains with or without merge mining, or kind of standalone blockchains in the case of Stacks. And so with that kind of motivation, let's just very, very quickly rattle off the Stacks fundamentals. For one, there is a standalone Stacks token, STX, that serves as the kind of to pay the gas fees, right? Computation is not free, so any kind of smart contract requires computation to be performed. And so, Stacks is basically paying the machine operators who are providing those computational resources. These would be the Stacks nodes. Now, as you might imagine, many folks within the Bitcoin community, particularly the kind of hardcore contingent, look at this standalone token with sort of disgust, right? It's the whole thing of well, why do you need the standalone token? It's simply there to enrich the founding team, whatever. I'm not saying that Stacks the token is different and not a shitcoin. It is, but I do think it has a really important role to play, and I think the trade-off is between that or what is typically the alternative of having a federated model for a sidechain such as Liquid, and this is kind of the crux of the debate that's going on now in Twitter. On the one side, you have kind of really hardcore Bitcoin proponents who say, never under any circumstance do we want a different token other than Sats, when you have a pegged version of that in the form of LBTC for Liquid, RBTC for RSK and what Sovereign uses. So I don't think you can even kind of make that argument, but there is some valid critique of any kind of standalone token, particularly that has a pre-mine. I think that is a valid critique of Stacks, but the benefit and the trade-off is that you can avoid these centralized trust models and federations that control the pegging in and out of your asset. So what do I mean by that? In the context of a sidechain like Liquid, you basically send Bitcoin and have it converted into a Bitcoin derivative, or LBTC, Liquid Bitcoin. And that is what's called a peg-in. And then when you want to withdraw from that system, you can do whatever you want in the system. There's different things and use cases you can do. And then when you're done with that, you can peg out to get back into native Bitcoin. The problem is that peg out process is controlled by a federation. And these are basically crypto exchanges and other kind of well-known companies within the space that control how that peg out process happens. And so this is highly non-ideal, right? And this also represents a fairly closed model in the sense that not everyone can be a miner on this sidechain. You basically have this kind of short list of entities that are managing and securing the blocks. So I think that's all I'm going to say on kind of the debate here. I personally, at least currently, align with Stacks in having this open model, despite having this kind of standalone token that had a pre-mine. But the sort of market is always going to dictate, what the kind of winner is. And at least thus far, Stacks is just exploding as a community. Developers are flocking over from Ethereum for the opportunity to build some really, really cool expressive functionality, but do so on the foundation that is Bitcoin. You have users flocking to the Stacks ecosystem. You have, orders of magnitude more transactions happening on Stacks than happening on Liquid. That's not a jab at Liquid. By the way, I think all of these options are great projects and are ultimately important experiments that are taking place, which will ultimately dictate the kind of answer that the market ultimately chooses. And what I also like is that, folks within the Stacks community really emphasize that, you don't have to necessarily go and buy the Stacks token as like an investment. It's there to pay the gas fees. It's a gas token. It's a utility token. It's still all about stacking sats as money, right? That's one of the big mistakes I think Ethereum has made, is by conflating and, saying that Ether is both gas fee and money, right? With this whole ultrasound, kind of campaign. So let's rattle off a few of the other kind of fundamentals. The Stacks consensus mechanism is novel, proof of transfer. Basically what happens is Stacks miners bid by spending Bitcoin for the right, or the potential right, to write the next block to the Stacks blockchain. And so this is very interesting. What happens to the spent Bitcoin is that vast majority of it goes to holders of the Stacks token. And what those holders are doing is they are providing information through a process called stacking. Stacking sounds, unfortunately, similar to staking. It's pretty different in the sense that with staking, you stake a particular asset and you get that same asset. With stacking, it's you're stacking your stacks and you're getting the flow of Bitcoin. You're getting the stream of Bitcoin. So this is a way to stack sats. Right now, it's 10% yield, and that's been pretty consistent. And so the stackers, by conducting the stacking transactions, essentially are signaling information about the chain tip to Stacks miners. So they're providing useful information to keep consensus within the Stacks blockchain that miners are using. And so you have this very interesting symbiosis happening at the consensus level of the Stacks protocol, which is very unique and is certainly not something that you have with some of these other kind of efforts like sidechains. And so that means Stacks gives Bitcoiners a novel way to stack sats. And what basically happens is, however many transactions that have happened within Stacks all get packaged up and hashed onto a Bitcoin transaction. And so that gets hashed onto a Bitcoin block. And so basically you have a one-to-one alignment of every Stacks block is hashed directly onto the Bitcoin blockchain. And so in this way, Bitcoin is recording the history of Stacks, meaning it would be equally difficult to unravel and rearrange the Stacks blockchain as rearranging the Bitcoin blockchain. And so that sort of settlement assurance and security is incredibly powerful and is something that Stacks inherits via this novel approach. What's also extremely powerful is Clarity. Clarity is the smart contract language developed for Stacks, and it contrasts with Solidity, which is the equivalent in the Ethereum ecosystem, in a number of ways that I won't get into in this video. But the sort of punchline is that Clarity ultimately outputs human-readable smart contracts. And so literally, if you're a user trying to borrow against your Bitcoin or whatever it is you're doing, the contract, the smart contract that's running that, you can read it. So that's very interesting, right? The kind of saying is, why would you ever sign a contract that you can't read, right? And the other kind of profound part of Clarity in terms of its virtual machine and how it works is it can read Bitcoin state, meaning it can understand what's happening with the Bitcoin blockchain. And indeed, Stacks node operators have to run a Bitcoin node as well. And so there's, Stacks smart contracts can trigger based on the Bitcoin state. This is a blend that is really unique and powerful. And I'm excited to see in the future, hopefully, an even tighter coupling. I think the next logical kind of big step would be being able to actually pay sats for the kind of gas fees, right? That would have the sort of tightest coupling I think that you could get in this sort of model. But there you have it. That's kind of a rundown of the Stacks fundamentals. I know that went kind of longer than I planned it to, but that hopefully covers both the fundamentals of Stacks as well as the kind of debate that's going on between Stacks and other options. Let's now transition and talk about some of the benefits that Stacks is bringing to Bitcoin, as well as spotlighting a few projects. I don't think there is a perfect answer, right? Like each choice has trade-offs. And so the downsides for Stacks are that you have a standalone token that had a pre-mine. If there was a world in which we could just do all of this additional complexity and use cases with native Bitcoin, and I think we'll eventually get there, right? That's ultimately going to be the best and win the day. Those critiques notwithstanding, I think there's a massive offset in the form of benefits that Stacks brings directly to Bitcoin. For one, there's actually a very, very small burn. So some of the Bitcoin that Stacks miners are expending is actually burned at the early part of each new mining cycle. So that is directly, supportive of Bitcoin's scarcity, right? It also provides a new source of demand for Bitcoin. Stacks miners have to spend Bitcoin. This highly valuable thing that's been converted from electricity, so you have the real energy expenditure of proof of work that's gone into minting Bitcoin that is being used to mine new stacks and mint new stacks. And so this creates a demand for Bitcoin as well. It extends the usefulness and capital efficiency of Bitcoin. Right now you have, however many Bitcoin just sort of idly sitting in wallets and in, cold storage, etc. And that's fine. That's great. But if we really are serious about a world of hyper Bitcoinization, where Bitcoin's being used as a medium of exchange, as the most pristine collateral asset, and against, as the base settlement layer of a more complex financial economy that we need for modern society, like if we're serious about that, we need these additional use cases to be supported on Bitcoin or as close to Bitcoin as it possibly can be. And Stacks, I think, is delivering that and is also bringing market share from the likes of, Ethereum and all these other kind of chains to the Bitcoin ecosystem, which I think is a very good thing. I think Stacks will also have the effect of promoting further decentralization. As I mentioned earlier, if you're a Stacks node operator, you also have to have a Bitcoin node so that you can understand and read the Bitcoin blockchain state. And then finally, and I could do a whole additional video on this in the future, but when we think about the long-term security budget for Bitcoin, so that is to say, as we programmatically decline in the block subsidy, or every new block that's mined in Bitcoin, there is the block subsidy that the miners get, as well as the transaction fees. And so eventually we'll get to the point where the only real component is transaction fees. Furthermore, you're going to see with the Lightning Network probably more and more day-to-day Bitcoin transactions migrating to layer 2s like Lightning. And so what you really want or what you welcome are any entities that are going to continue to provide a source of on-chain Bitcoin fees. And via the consensus mechanism we just discussed, that is Stacks. And so Stacks miners will be a customer, if you will, for on-chain Bitcoin transactions into perpetuity, which will help provide additional assurance, I would say, to the long-term Bitcoin security budget. So net, as you can tell, I think there's a ton here. I think it's a huge mistake to kind of write this off, just given that there's this additional token, especially having spent an awful lot of time looking at the builders within this ecosystem, it is absolutely exploding. And so I want to cover just a few of the kind of projects that that are coming out of Stacks. One is just a massive array and slew of NFT collections and marketplaces. Now, I personally think 80+% of NFTs right now are speculative hype. But keep in mind, like, collectibles are collectibles. There's Beanie Babies, there's Pokemon cards. Like, there is no reason to think that we won't have extensions of that in the digital realm as well. So, like, there's absolutely going to be collectibles, and there is a market for collectibles. But I think NFTs are going to ultimately help codify property rights across a much wider range of things. And so things like, royalties for music or art or entertainment or movies or, whatever the case is. You could imagine NFTs serving as passes for, unique benefits in the physical or digital worlds. Like, I think it's hard to even imagine all the different use cases that we'll ultimately see. And the power of Stacks is that it allows anyone to mint NFTs that settle onto Bitcoin. And so when you talk about like this rare collectible that, you want to have provenance, what better place to codify that than on the Bitcoin blockchain? So NFTs on Bitcoin has been a massive Cambrian explosion within the Stacks community. Again, I think we're seeing some projects that are like, okay, but we're also seeing some really creative stuff as well. So that'll be interesting to watch. But beyond that, we're also seeing a number of other interesting projects. One is Alex Go, which is doing their testnet as we speak. You can basically go and do things like borrowing and lending, again, in a trustless manner. That is the key. You can do margin trading and different things like that. So these are kind of like the financial building blocks that you really need within any kind of system of money, right? Like, you need to be able to borrow and lend. You need to be able to to provide liquidity and and be compensated for that. These are financial primitives that are required, and so that's been very, very cool to see. You also have Arcadeco. Arcadeco has just launched on mainnet, and they have provided what is essentially a self-paying loan. And so how this works is you deposit Stacks into a vault in Arcadeco, and by doing that, you're able to mint, or basically borrow against your Stacks, in the USDA stablecoin that Arcadeco has created. So this is a crypto-backed stablecoin, I guess similar to DAI, but again, I'm not like too knowledgeable of the stablecoin space. But in any case, what this allows you to do is any number of things. Like, you could buy more Stacks with that. You could, cash it out, buy more Bitcoin. Like, you could use it for, you cash it out and use it for living expenses. Whatever the case is, you've basically just borrowed against your Stacks, and I'm sure soon to be native Bitcoin in a trustless fashion, which is great. And then what happens is you can elect to stack your deposited Stacks. And so if you choose to do that, Arcadeco will stack your Stacks on your behalf and use the yield in Bitcoin to pay down the loan automatically. And so as an example, that yield right now for stacking is about 10%. And the kind of interest rate on these loans, if you will, are in the range of 4 to 7%. And so this means that you're paying the loan back in a sort of automated way, and then collecting whatever is left over of the additional stacking rewards. So very, very cool. Again, I do think there is a place for stable coins in any ecosystem, at least in this kind of transition phase from the system we live in today to a world in which Bitcoin is everyone's unit of account. That's kind of all I'll say there. And then finally, you have platforms like Sigil that are that's basically a blog writing, think like Medium or Substack, etc. And what can happen there is, as a reader, you can stack your Stacks and delegate the Bitcoin yield to whomever you subscribe to and follow. And so this, I think, illustrates very novel application in terms of business model for stacking. Like, you can basically stack your stacks and then delegate your Bitcoin yield to whatever type of subscription. In the case of Sigil, it's blog writing. But there's also other exciting platforms that are being built. And so I just wanted to call a couple of these out as sort of scratching the surface of what is happening within the Stacks ecosystem. I think if you take a closer look, it is just extraordinarily exciting to see. But with all of that, let's go ahead and wrap this video up. All right, my friends, there you have it. We covered a lot of ground as we tend to do. So if this felt like a lot, again, I would encourage you to go back and watch some of the more intro videos where I go a little more in depth into kind of the Stacks fundamentals. But my goal for this video was to really highlight some of the incredible stuff being built in the Stacks ecosystem and how all that activity ultimately benefits Bitcoin and extends what Bitcoin can do. We're not there yet in terms of a kind of perfect DeFi on Bitcoin solution, but I think Stacks is the horse I have picked, at least thus far. But I'm curious to hear, what do you think? I'm definitely going to do videos in the future where I go more into depth on Liquid. I have done a video on Sovereign, if you're curious to check that out, which uses the RSK sidechain. But I'll definitely continue doing these videos because I think this is a space that is heating up, and we're going to see a lot of novel experimentation. And ultimately, the winners of that experimentation will help usher in an age of hyper-Bitcoinization where, again, we can not just send money trustlessly, but also engage in more complex financial activities and other activities, right? But I'm curious to hear what you think. Leave me a comment in the comments down below. But for now, we'll go ahead and leave this video here. I hope you found this interesting and valuable. If you did, you already know what to do. Give this video a like. Let me know your thoughts. As always, my friends, every sat counts, especially when it's supercharged with additional extensibility from something like Stacks. And until next time, I'll see you then.